Hey guys, it's Lolly B. My 1 year anniversary of starting digital is coming up, and I probably should have waited to do this video because it's like 2 months away. But I really couldn't help myself, so here we go. This video is about the things I really wish I had known when I started digital for the first time. So brace yourselves because I'm about to show you the very first digital piece I ever drew. So this is it. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and it definitely shows. It's really hard to believe that that was less than a year ago though. I'm kind of blown away by that. I still use the same software, MediBang, so everything I'm going to say will apply to that. But most drawing softwares are generally the same, so even if you don't use MediBang, there should be some helpful information in here. So, of course, since it's a redraw, I used the same character. It's a slightly different pose, but basically the same thing. So first things first is layers. Of course, the drawing that I did is on a completely separate layer, and I always turn down the opacity so I can see the line art that I'm drawing over it. I also always use folders. I will put all of the line art in one folder, all of the colors in one folder, and all of the background in one folder, so that if I want to transform something, all of it gets transformed together. I also always use a G pen for my line art. Depending on the size of the canvas, this one was actually must have been bigger than what I normally do, because normally I use a 5, but I moved it up to a 8, and I think later I'm pretty sure I increased it to a 10. I also just wanted to mention that I'm going to be kind of jumping around a little bit so that I can thoroughly explain all the different tools that I use. So I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is the eyeballs. Because this particular character is supposed to have one kind of blind eye, I did all of that in blue so that it kind of stands out and you can tell, you know, it's different. Also, something I've never done this before, but it was kind of like a happy mistake. I didn't turn up the opacity all the way for the little eye highlights. Also, I always put them on a separate layer because the more layers you use, the easier it's going to be to fix them up if something's wrong and all of that. So when in doubt, use a new layer. Now I am going on to the flat, so I make a new folder with new color layers. And the first thing I always start with is skin. Don't ask me why, I just have weird little isms. Also, it's extremely important to make sure that all of your line art layers, any ones that you have, are above any color layers. The reason for that is that layers kind of work like gravity. If you have a pillow on top of a blanket, you're going to see the pillow and not the blanket. So layers, that's probably a bad visual, but layers work the same way. So if you have the color layer on top of the line art layers, then the color will start to cover up your line art, and you don't want that. You'll see me kind of messing around with the skin tones and trying to find the right ones. I don't know if it's just my really bad eyesight, but I can't tell what it looks like until I see a bunch of it actually on the character, so sometimes I try like 5 different colors before I'm happy with it. So the last thing that I'll go over about flats is that when you use the bucket tool, there will be tiny little spaces where the color didn't get between line art like this. So it's very important to go through and fix all of those tiny little spaces. I'm actually really bad about it, maybe because for some reason I can't tell if I've left a hole until I've put the shading on it. And again, I guess that's just my bad eyesight. But it's important to do that because, yeah, as soon as you put the shading on, you'll be able to see those little holes. So, I mean, and it's okay if you missed a hole. It's always easy to go through and fix it, but it's kind of unprofessional to leave the holes. Also, just about every single color that I do goes on a different line art layer. Sometimes I'll combine them, like I'm pretty sure I combined his tunic layer with his eye color layer because they're nowhere near close to each other, and I can shade them without getting into each other. But if I put all of the colors on the same layer, then I'd be trying to shade the skin layer, and I'd be getting skin tones on the hair and having to meticulously go through and erase all of it, and so that's just a massive headache. So the safe thing to do is just to put everything on a separate layer, but if you think they're far enough to get away with using one layer, then definitely. Okay, so we have finally gotten to my favorite thing that I have ever learned. It is a lifesaver. I have no words for how much I love this tool, and it is called the clipping tool, and it's just this tiny little button up there at the top, and for the longest time I had no idea what it was. Basically, all it is that everything that I draw on a particular layer, if it is clipped to the skin tone layer, it does not go outside the skin tone layer. It just stays right in there. That is the most beautiful tool I have ever come across. And of course, it doesn't just work for skin tone, it works for hair and his clothes and like all kinds of stuff. So other than the beautiful clipping tool, basically the process that I use is that every hue of shading is on a different layer. So the dark shading is on one layer and the highlights are on another. Sometimes I make the airbrush tool really big and I kind of put in just some light effects of, you know, lighting or whatever shade that I don't want really harsh. Those go on a completely different layer. The reason for that is when you go to blur a particular shading tone, if I only want to blur the dark tone but I have a highlight sitting right there next to it, I will blur them both, and that's not a cool thing, so just always use multiple layers. But you do have to keep in mind what layer you want on the top, and as you may have caught it there, I had the dark shading above the highlight shading, and so I was like, I kept going over it, going like, what's going on? I've got a really light color, why isn't it showing up? Because the dark layer was on top of the highlights. Another important thing when you're shading is to keep in mind where your light source is coming from. For some weird reason, I always default it to the right hand side. I don't know, you may be different. And depending on what I do for the background, sometimes I've put the light source in the wrong place, and that's always the most frustrating thing. So planning out is always a good thing. The other thing I'm really glad I figured out is that little button up at the top that says normal. When you click it, it gives you all these other different options, and you can go through and click on them and see what they look like. Basically, all it's doing is it is color correcting. I really wish I had like a bar where I could color correct. I guess it's just a MediBang thing where they already have like set hues. But basically all it does is it takes that layer and it intensifies the color or detensifies the color, you know, whatever option you choose. And I really like that because, I mean, other artists have difficulty with it too. They pick the wrong color and they don't really know how exactly to intensify it, and that does it all for you, so it's a beautiful tool. And I skipped the head a little bit to the hair. Basically what I do is I lay down flat colors, shading, and highlight, and I actually do want the shading and the highlight to be on the same layer for the hair. I want them to blend into each other, so that's a good thing. And then on the layer closest to the flats, I put the hair strands. The reason why I do the highlighting and the shading first before I do the strands is because I'm not gonna know what the strands look like when the shading and the highlights are on top of them. And I know that sounds like a silly thing, and it might be a silly thing, but it's something that I do because I want to know what the hair strands will look like when the highlights and the shading are on top of it. I also keep the strands all on one layer as well because, like the highlights, I want them to blend into each other. I use a lot of different colors when I put in strands. I did kind of a middle ground color at first. Now I'm putting in a kind of whitish yellow, and then I put in a dark brown color because he's supposed to have dirty blonde hair. But it's also very shiny and it's supposed to kind of look like fire since that's his power. So yeah. Also, I thought I'd just mention real quick in case you're confused that this is one of my own characters. I actually drew this guy in the proportions video that I released last week if you watched it. So yeah, this is Conan. I cut out all of the footage of me shading his tunic, but you know, all the same rules apply. So now I am doing the eyes. This is just my way of doing eyes. I know there are probably better ways, but this is just what I've gotten used to. I will use 3 to 4 varying colors and then blur them out just very subtly so that it's not too stark. One of the last things I do to give the eye some dimension is take the black and turn the opacity down really low, and then I blur it out and erase all of the all of the gray stuff that isn't supposed to be there. It gives it some 3D kind of lifelikeness, and it always looks really good to me, so yeah, I like doing that. So this is the end of the video, and I've got to say I'm honestly really shocked at how much progress I've made in less than a year. It's really exciting, and I hope I continue to make as much progress. I really hope you found something in this video helpful. I plan to do a detailed series on MediBang and how the different tools work, or at least the ones that I use. So yeah, that's something to be excited about. If there's anything you're confused about because I didn't quite explain it correctly in the video, please let me know in the comments and I will try to do my best to clear it up. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you all in another video. Bye!